Alright, so we're going to be highlighting some top tier gaming mice in 2024 to find what choice clicks with you. But before I start listing off my top choices, we need to do a deep dive into key features you should be looking for in your mouse. If you're just interested in the mice though, feel free to skip ahead using the timestamps in the description below. So some of the important things you need to think about before you buy a mouse are the sensor, the weight, grip style, wired versus wireless, and any other additional features like extra buttons. So you might be thinking that the sensor is the most important thing since it impacts performance and precision. But the reality is that with how good the sensors have gotten over the years, the difference from one high quality sensor to another is pretty minimal. And as for the technology that makes those sensors work, in the case of this video, all the mice we're going to talk about are using optical sensors. And an optical sensor works by emitting light and then detecting the light reflections as the mouse is moved. Now the weight is a much more important factor to consider when you're buying a mouse. Lightweight options normally hover around 60 grams, while heavyweight options might be around 120 grams or higher. Now on paper, that might not sound like that big of a weight difference, but depending on what you're doing or your personal preferences, it might make a major difference. As an example, let's say your favorite type of video game is a shooter that requires precise aim and lots of mouse movement like Counter-Strike. A lighter mouse makes it easier and faster to move it from one end of your mouse pad to the other. Not only does that make it easier to play the game at a higher level, but the lower weight means you're putting less strain on your arm and wrist as you do repetitive motions over and over again, day in and day out. I know it seems unlikely you'll get injured from using something as light as a mouse, but basically any repetitive motion can cause pain eventually. So if you want to avoid a future injury, it might be something to consider. Now on the flip side, you have heavier mice. Some people just like how the extra weight feels in their hand. And they feel like there's less shakiness because of the added friction the mouse is created by being heavier. I'm not going to outright say one option is better than the other because that all comes down to personal preference, but personally, I think lighter mouse are the better option. But weight isn't the only important preference choice you have to make. The other major choice is the mouse shape and what type of grip type that shape allows for. So computer mice can come in all sorts of shapes and sizes with different tilts for the front and back and hump size. And the reason for that is because every person has a different sized hand that influences how you grip the mouse. That's why you end up with situations where one person might think one mouse is the best out there, while another person might think that same mouse feels like they're gripping a bag of sharp rocks. Since there are so many different shapes out there, I'm only really going to talk about the shapes of the mice in this video as I go over them. But for a really basic simplification, computer mice normally come in two different forms. The first form is the ergonomic design. If the name didn't give it away, these mice are trying to conform to the shape of your hand and make the mouse more comfortable to use over long periods of time. If you can manage to find a mouse that really matches your hand size and grip style, these can be really comfortable. But if you can't find one that matches those traits, you might actually find an ergonomic mouse awkward to hold. Now the other basic general mouse form is symmetrical mice. You can also call them ambidextrous mice because unlike the ergonomic choice, which is trying to conform to the shape of your hand, normally your right hand, ambidextrous mice are shaped the same way on both sides, so you can technically hold them in your left hand as well. The real advantage of this mouse type is that because it's more uniform in its shape, it's easier to try different grips since the mouse isn't trying to push you into one specific way of holding it like an ergonomic mouse would. Now I keep mentioning different grips, so at this point you're probably asking yourself, what grip styles are there? Well, people normally have one of the three basic grip techniques, which are the palm grip, claw grip, and fingertip grip. Now, a palm grip is where your entire hand rests on the mouse. Pretty basic. In contrast, some people like the claw grip. This is where the palm rests on the back of the mouse and the fingers are arched above the mouse buttons, making your hand take the shape of a claw. And then the third popular option is the fingertip grip. That's where your hand hovers in the air with only the last digit of the fingers in contact with the mouse. Now, which one of these grips is best? Well, that's all preference. For myself, I normally alternate between a palm grip or claw grip depending on what mouse I'm using. I personally don't like fingertip grip, and I know some people aren't a fan of it, especially if you have a heavier mouse, since it puts more strain on the fingers. But again, that's just preference, and in reality, you probably never think about how you hold your mouse. because you're going to naturally start holding it in the way you like on a subconscious level. The one thing I know you're going to notice is if the mouse is wired or wireless. Now, for a very long period of time, wired mouse had a better latency response time than wireless. But it's 2024 now. At this point, there's basically no discernible difference in latency between the two. So what other differences are there? Well, wireless is great because you're not limited by cord length and you don't have to deal with the added friction of the cord against your desk and mousepad. But you do have to charge a wireless mouse. That's not really a big deal though, unless the mouse you buy has a bad battery that quickly runs out, and even then, you just have to plug it in to recharge it. So even though you don't have to charge a wired mouse, it's not really that big of a pro in this day and age. But for certain brand mice styles, you might be able to find a wired version of the mouse cheaper than the wireless one, so if you're on a budget, that might be a realistic pro for you. But some wireless mouse on the market are actually pretty cheap nowadays, which we'll cover near the end of the video. Now the last thing that's going to help determine what mouse you should buy is the additional features or characteristics. Those features are things like extra buttons you can assign macro shortcuts to, as well as any lighting effects if you want them. That might matter if you care about how the mouse looks to match the aesthetic of your setup. Speaking about your setup, in case you're looking for more info about what to buy, you should check out my blog website, TheCodeComet.com, which has info about all sorts of things like microphones, CPUs, cameras, etc. But if you don't like reading, be sure to check out some of my other videos on this channel after you're done watching this one. But enough about that. Now that I've given you some basic background information about mouse buying tips, let's talk about the mouse I actually recommend you buy. Disclaimer, all the products I'm about to talk about are linked in the description. These products are affiliate links, and if you purchase through them, I earn a small commission. This comes at no additional cost to you and helps support me so I can keep making content for you. So let's jump right into it. The first mouse I want to recommend is the extremely popular Logitech G Pro X Superlight wireless gaming mouse. If you've done any research into gaming mice, you've most likely seen this mouse recommended before, and for good reason. It's an incredibly popular option among professional players in many esports titles like Counter-Strike and Valorant. And that's because the mouse is incredibly light, weighing under 63 grams. Which, if you remember from earlier, is beneficial as it increases the speed you can perform actions that require you to move your mouse back and forth in quick succession. Not only that, but if you're somebody who's really interested in constantly playing these shooters, especially for long sessions, since the matches in these games go on for a pretty long period of time, it's going to end up putting less strain on your arm and wrist. The weight isn't the only reason this mouse is easy to move across the mousepad. It's also thanks to its PTFE-based feet, which is a fluoropolymer you might know by the name of Teflon. That's nothing crazy unique though, since PTFE feet is pretty common among gaming mice. As for the sensor, it uses a Hero sensor, which is an optical sensor you can find all throughout Logitech's mouse lineup. But again, just to reiterate, all the sensors in this video are high quality and it's highly unlikely you'll be able to tell the difference between them. So what about the shape? Well, it has a symmetrical design that a lot of people enjoy since it works for a lot of different hand sizes and grip types. That also means it's easier to experiment with different grip types if you want. But don't overthink it, you'll most likely find the right grip style subconsciously just by using the mouse. As for buttons, this mouse has a standard left and right click plus scroll wheel as well as 2 buttons on the left side. Now the battery on this mouse is pretty solid. It holds a charge for around 70 hours before you have to recharge it. Speaking of charging, one con some users found with this mouse is the fact that it utilizes a micro USB connector instead of a USB-C. But if that's a deal breaker for you, don't worry, because Logitech has released an updated version of this mouse that's called the SUPERLIGHT 2. It's just like the Superlight, but with some slight differences as the Generation 2 model. Those differences include a slightly updated sensor, an increased battery life of 95 hours, and light force hybrid optical switches. For context, the Gen 1 model uses traditional mechanical switches called Omron 20M switches. This is actually a big difference because mechanical switches are more prone to getting a double-click issue later in its lifespan, while the optical switches should prevent that issue from occurring. As for any other differences, the Gen 2 features a higher maximum wireless polling rate of 2000 Hz, while the Gen 1 has a maximum of 1000 Hz. And for context, polling rate is the frequency data that the sensor collects that's sent to your device. But anything above 1000 Hz has diminishing returns on responsiveness, so it's not really that big of a difference. As for price, the Logitech G Pro X Superlight is going to cost you around $159 USD on Amazon if you're looking at the listed price. But the reality is this mouse is often on sale around $115 USD ever since the SUPERLIGHT 2 came out. And that's because the SUPERLIGHT 2 has a price of $159 USD, so it wouldn't make sense to buy the Gen 1 model at full price because the Gen 2 model would cost the same. Now, the next choice I want to talk about is the Razer DeathAdder V3 Pro gaming mouse. This mouse shares a lot of similar characteristics to the SUPERLIGHT and is also a popular option among professional esports players. Just like the SUPERLIGHT, it's incredibly light at 63 grams, and with its wireless design, it's really easy to move the mouse around at high speeds without having to deal with any added friction. Speaking of wireless, this mouse's battery life is estimated at 90 hours and is easily rechargeable through USB-C. Pretty similar to the SUPERLIGHT, right? So what's the difference? Well, the mouse shape is a little different with a streamlined ergonomic form meant to naturally match the contours of your right hand. So, if you have the right hand size for this mouse, it should be more comfortable to hold for long periods of time. So how do you know if the shape is right for you? Well, the reality is that it's just trial and error and you're gonna have to find what works for you. So if you can try the mouse in person somewhere to see how it fits. A lot of people, including pro esports players, find it comfortable though, which is one of the reasons it's become such a popular option. So the odds of you liking the mouse are pretty high. Now, for the other specifications of the DeathAdder V3 Pro, it comes equipped with a Focus Pro 30K optical sensor, which is pretty good. And the switches on this mouse are also optical, so you won't have to deal with the double-click issue I mentioned was common with mechanical switches. It also has a default polling rate of 1000 Hz, but technically you can upgrade that to 8000 Hz if you buy the mouse with the Razer Hyper Polling wireless dongle, but of course that makes it cost more. Speaking of cost, the Razer DeathAdder V3 Pro is going to cost you around $149 USD as its listed price, but it can be found on sale pretty often, so be sure to keep an eye out for that. And if you're interested in bundling with that wireless dongle I mentioned, that's going to cost you around $160 USD. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this guy is crazy and there's no way you're going to pay over $100 on a mouse. Well, don't click away because I'm about to go over some more affordable options that are under $100 and under $50 respectively. So the first mouse in this price range I think is a really solid choice is the ENDGAME Gear XM2 WE wireless gaming mouse. It has a symmetrical design shape with an anti-sweat coating, so it's a pretty safe choice if you don't know your grip style. As for the weight, it weighs under 64 grams, so pretty similar to the other mice I've listed so far. Of course, it's wireless and it's rechargeable with a USB-C cable, with a battery life they claim lasts about a week between charges. But if you do forget to charge it, you can also use it in wired mode with the same cable. As for its feet, it has pretty standard Teflon skates. And its other features include 5 buttons in total, which are the normal left and right click, scroll wheel, plus 2 thumb buttons. The switches are KL-Go optical switches, so again, this mouse shouldn't have a double click issue down the line. And the sensor is the PixArt PAW 3370 optical sensor. So when you start adding up all these features, it means it's incredibly similar to the other options we've listed, but is a slightly cheaper option at around $90 USD, which is pretty expensive, but it could be worse, especially for what you're getting. Now before you click away, let's cover a solid affordable option, the Kysona Aztec wireless gaming mouse. Now, if you haven't bought a mouse in a while, or you're just not somebody interested in gaming mice, you might not have heard of this mouse brand. Well, that's because several Chinese competitors have emerged on the market in recent times, which are trying to fill this niche of solid, affordable wireless gaming mice that might be lacking some features like anti-sweat coating, but offer an amazing price to feature ratio for a fraction of the cost. And out of those many different mice, I feel like the Kysona Aztec is one of the better to emerge. The mouse is of course wireless, but what's really cool is that even though it's so cheap, it's still rechargeable with a battery life of 80 hours, and it uses a USB-C connection. That's really impressive for this price range since most name brand mice around this cost, like the Logitech G305 as an example, still use AA batteries, which you're going to need to constantly replace. Not only that, but this mouse is really light at a weight of 55 grams and has a symmetrical shape to it. It's a little bit smaller than a Logitech SUPERLIGHT mouse in shape, but not by much. That's not a big deal, but if you have big hands, that's something to keep in mind. The mouse also has standard PTFE skates and uses Huano white dot switches that they estimate will last you around 90 million clicks. The only other things I really want to mention are that it of course has a standard polling rate that goes up to 1000 Hz and a pretty high quality sensor, the PAM 3395. So overall, this mouse might be worth taking a chance on, especially because this mouse has all those features and only costs $35 USD on Amazon, meaning this mouse costs over $100 less than the Logitech G Pro X SUPERLIGHT 2. And with that, those are all the mice I want to talk about in this video. Of course, there are other great mice out there that I didn't recommend, but if you want me to take a look at any of them in the future, let me know in the comments below. Also, don't be afraid to let me know about other tech-related stuff you want to see from me. And before you go, please like and subscribe, it really helps the channel and makes me get closer to my goal of getting monetized. Oh, and don't forget to check out TheCodeComet.com if you're interested at a sneak peek at some of the tech topics I'll most likely be making videos on in the future. Anyways, thanks for watching and catch you next time. Peace.